All right. I'm only talking into the microphone only because it's tied to our video camera. I know it's a nice small group tonight. I want to introduce Mr. George Scott. He has an extensive career with like the Traumatic Loss Coalition and helping schools navigate the challenging situations surrounding sometimes when students pass away. He was on site today working with our students. His team of counselors that he's worked with have been on site at the middle school and the high school, working with our students and staff, again, through these challenges. So I want to give him a nice warm welcome for coming out tonight. And Mr. Scott.
So just to reiterate, we're being recorded. If you want to wait until the end for questions, we'll turn the recording off if that makes you more comfortable. If you want to ask questions during the evening, I'm fine with that because I'd rather you go away with as many questions answered as possible. The other thing that we do have is we have the ability to have interpretation. Does anybody in the audience need an interpreter? You may need an interpreter for me. You know, it has always been my habit when I'm having conversations with parents about a lot of things about kids. It's not just during really difficult times. But in the past, I've always had the habit of saying good evening. But what I know is it may not be. And in fact, because of the topic, because of the information that we want to share, for many of you, it's quite the opposite of a good evening. And I'm going to also assume, because I don't know anybody in the room, that there are families who are not here, but that may, in fact, tune into that recording, that it's a terrible evening. We're talking about this issue of grief and loss. We're talking about tonight what moms and dads can do to create healthy children. Typically, I ask things like, how many of you want your kids to be happy? And everybody puts their hand up. And I said, well, why don't you make that like the second or third priority? Because what I would want is I would want your kids to be healthy, both physically and emotionally, because then happiness is not elusive. They can navigate life much, much better. So you'll hear some of my biases about that tonight. Working together to support our kids, right? A community conversation. I certainly will reference grief and loss. I certainly will reference death, but I will not talk specifically about the two children who died. That would be very disrespectful of me with the families. But I don't want to avoid that because the death from last July and the death from now is a huge, huge impact both the middle school and the high school, and maybe even at the elementary, and I haven't had much of a connection there. How many of you have elementary children? Oh, terrific. Terrific. Glad you're here. Good for you. And the last thing we'll talk about is, and so what? So how do we recover? What do we need to do? Here's one of my biases, and I'll try to put a red flag on all my biases. They're just the way George Scott believes. I think it's really difficult for our kids to navigate the craziness of life the way it is now. Complicated, yes, by technology, but also complicated by a lot of other things, some of it that technology brings in, and some of it because of the stressors on families. I think my experience is, and I'll tell you a little bit about my orientation, is that many of our families are very fragile, a lot of stressors, and when that happens, things begin to unravel. And I see our kids as barometers. They can kind of tell me what's going on inside the family unit because they're very sensitive to it. So I want to cover all of that. Now, keep in mind, because I don't know you, I'm not talking about you and your family, but I am talking about what I know about in terms of families. So this is proof. This is proof that you're not alone in whatever your position is around what's going on in South River or what's personally going on in your own family or how you have and you've trying to manage your own suffering. Because we are going to talk about your suffering as well, not just the suffering of the kids. So this is intended to be serious, but it doesn't mean that we might not chuckle about something. See, I don't see that as disrespectful. I see that as balanced. In fact, as we were kind of meeting up with kids today who just didn't want to show any emotion other than sad, is that a laughter about a memory, for instance, can be a really good thing to help lift the spirit. Not disrespectful. It's on balance. It's what we need as human beings in order to get through really difficult times. And we do want to talk about the well-being of your kids. What does it mean to raise healthy kids? What do they need? What gets in the way? And how do you know? Same message here as on the first slide, and that is showing up on a Thursday evening. See, here's where my mind goes in terms of that laughter. It's like, must be a really terrible night on TV that y'all kind of showed up, right? So it's that kind of thing. Like, listen, even if you don't chuckle, I'm chuckling up here because that's how I keep the balance on this kind of stuff. This is huge. There are so many school districts, both in New Jersey, where I do most of my work, or in Pennsylvania, where I do some of my work, in which school districts don't want to talk about any of this. And when I got a call from the superintendent that says, hey, we're struggling,
sometimes this button can be really sensitive, so just be, if you just watch that one. It's on, that one's on.
is that better, Brian? Oh, now I have to start all over. There is such a thing as positive stress. Positive stress motivates us. We generate it in order to get something accomplished. I often use with kids that I'm with, like sports teams, right? The coach gets them pumped up. Like, how do you create that positive stress? So we don't want to talk badly about stress in general. But then there's something that's called tolerable stress. It accumulates. We manage it. Might have a bad day. I'm going to talk about how stress affects you guys. There's some of you guys in the room that are headache people. You don't have to acknowledge that. I just know you're out there. There are some of you folks in the room that are gut people. You don't have to acknowledge it. I just know that there are 3 places in the body where human beings hold stress: head, gut, pulmonary, cardiac. And if we have tolerable stress, but we know that it's there, and we can feel that it's there, and we know what to do about it, then it becomes positive stress, or it just leaves our body. This is a lesson we teach our kids, because they are stressed too, and you'll see it. We'll talk about what are the indicators. You'll see it in their behavior. You'll know when they're getting bothered because it starts to stack up. So there's this positive stress, there's this tolerable stress, and then it gets to the point where it's toxic, and toxic stress can be dangerous to us. It's dangerous to us physically, and it's dangerous to us emotionally. And if, in fact, we don't acknowledge it, understand it, do something about it, it will make our bodies sick, either emotionally or physically. Here are some common stress responses in kids, and I will say in adults as well. You know, can you imagine, like, you're late for work and you can't find your keys, right? and you're going around the house like a crazy person saying, who's seen my keys, who's seen my keys? And one of your kids says, Ma, Dad, you got them in your hand, because you didn't even know it, right? Because your stress is up. Maybe you're going to have a meeting with the boss, or maybe you don't want to be late for an important get-together. So these things you will see in your kids, they're not terrible indicators. They're just red flags that say, oh, as a mom or dad, I need to pay attention. These are signs of toxic stress. When these accumulate, your kid is not in a good space, or you're not in a good space. And this goes for high school, middle school, elementary kids, even down as young as toddlers, because there can be reasons why their bodies get stressed as well. Now, the very first one, I just want to make sure that you know that I know, probably in South River, there is no irritability among adults. Probably that's not a factor, right? Of course it's a factor. And the more irritable we get, we need to pay attention, like, what's going on? Where's this coming from? I'll highlight some others. We talked about the physical illnesses of your head and your gut and your chest. We begin to see it in if it's an adult, tardies to work, can't get there, can't get up in the morning. Same thing with kids. It can be tardies or it can be absences. We just need to be able to say it's not just bad behavior, because I don't like just laying that on people all the time. I'm always curious, like, gee, I wonder what that behavior is, where it's coming from. I wonder what's causing it. And then you see also the decrease in the work performance or school performance. There are more. Now, we've been seeing quite a bit of this recently because of Martin's death, right? We've been seeing this issue of temper and blaming. We call it scapegoating. We're looking for somebody to pay a price to make it make sense. And here's what we know. It doesn't make sense. It's just a sucky thing that happens in life. I told the kids this today. I said, my heart's breaking for you guys. At an age of 14, 15, you should not have to figure out how to get through this. But what we know is that irritability and temper outbursts doesn't mean that they're intentionally being mean. Their body and minds are out of their control right now, and they're just scurrying. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about fight flight. When your cortisol level goes, right? When we're stressed, we get cortisol flowing in our bodies. That makes us run from danger, good thing. It's a survival. It makes us fight where we need to, good thing. But for most of us, it can get in the way and make us kind of be unbearable. We don't want to be around people who have these big surges and who are really irritable and cranky. You can also see the aggression and the bullying. The isolation is the shutdown, right? It's not just the flight. You can get so overwhelmed that literally you'll watch your body or a kid's body just shut down. We'll talk about sleep in a minute because there's an indicator of that. We also know that when somebody is just really anxious, if you go to give them a hug, they'll say, leave me alone, don't touch me. The touch almost hurts them. So one of the things that I always suggest to mom and dad, if your kid is in a tough spot and they're trying to get through it, ask them what they need. Ask them if you can get closer. Sit with them. Ask them if you can give them a hug. That allows them to control their own environment. And if they say, not now, then respect that. Say, okay, I just want you to know I'm always going to be here. I'll always come back for you. Use of drugs and alcohol. One of the things we talked about today with kids, and we've talked about it with staff, and that's the issue of what do you do with the emotional pain that this has created? If it's toxic stress, there are things that we know we can do. If you don't know what to do, then sometimes there's a tendency to go right to alcohol or right to marijuana, because what that does, you ingest it, it takes the edge off, and for the moment you can tolerate it. But as soon as it's out of your system, it's coming back up again. So we call it a maladaptive or not a healthy coping skill. Trust me, it works, which is why adults and kids go that route, because it works, but it doesn't have enough of a long sustaining, and it leads to other kinds of problems. So I talk a lot about vulnerability. Your vulnerability, in large part, based upon my work, what I believe and what I know, your vulnerability, some of you, you've been carrying this for a very, very long time because vulnerability frequently starts in childhood. It's where, I'm a family therapist, so I'm coming from that perspective. I also work in schools with parents and kids, so I come from that perspective. I had a 37-year career in education as a director. But the point that I'd like to make on that is that we bring our vulnerabilities along, and the more we realize that, that's a hot button for me. Like, I don't know why every time I'm with him or I'm with her, I can just feel myself churn. I don't know what that music, I don't know why when it gets really warm in the room, we begin to understand what our hot buttons are, and guess what? Your kids have them too. Now, here's some not so good news. Some of their hot buttons are inherited from mom and dad. It's the legacy. It's the way we are as adults and the way we parent. Like, for instance, how many of you, when your little baby was born, even if they're 16 or 18 now, how many of you got the manual with them, like how to raise this little bugger? There was none of that. You either got good advice or bad advice from people in the family, or you read a lot of books, or you did a whole lot of, let's try it and see if it works, right? So what we know is this stuff is not bad behavior, it's we understand why it happens to be that way. And what we know is that vulnerability can in fact come from inside the family. And I simply suggest you pay attention to that. That toxic stress suppresses your immune system. Your immune system, when it's operating really well, keeps you healthy, helps your body repair. But when you're overwhelmed or toxic stress is there a lot, that immune system isn't doing all that it can do for you. And therefore, you're prone to more things going wrong. You're prone to more viruses and colds. You're literally even prone to more falls, burns, broken bones when your immune system is suppressed and your vulnerability is high. So there's kind of really nice, good science behind it if we then can do some introspection and figure out what's going on with us, because that will help us figure out what's going on with our kids. So there's a grief response. Yes, grief is a direct reaction response to a death, but grief is really a direct reaction response to anything that you lose that's special. So it's what you feel. We grieve the loss of somebody, even like a friend who moves away. We grieve that. That's really sad for us. We can't do anything about that. That's a grief response. It's not high, and it doesn't last very long, but it's there. There's a grief response when we have a favorite teacher who's going to leave the classroom or going to retire. We really miss that person already. We begin to grieve. How many of you have gone into this state of grieving when the family pet has died and the pet has been a part of the family for a very long time? So whenever there is a loss that you have to live without, let's make this funny. How many of you, when your kids were toddlers, had a favorite stuffed animal that you left at the restaurant? They wouldn't go to sleep, and you had to drive back to the restaurant to get the stuffed animal because for them, it was a grief response. The smell, the touch was part of what they were used to. So we don't dismiss it. We don't minimize it. It's a real thing, which is why for the past week here, 10 days here, I've been encouraging people to be really patient around the grief behaviors that we're seeing in our kids. Whenever we are forced to say goodbye, it's really uncomfortable. It's really overwhelming. Here are the labels for the behaviors and the feelings. I'm thinking that for some of you, maybe all of you, there's something up on the screen that you can relate to. Because likely, you've gotten this far in your life and you've had to navigate grief experiences. We're also going to talk about mourning as a contrast to grief, but here's some more grief. The book that I use in my graduate class is called The Body Keeps the Score. When you live through life and things happen, if you're not able to identify how it can be hurtful and you wind up absorbing it, then the body begins to say, hey, we can't take it anymore. Why is it that my heart is racing? Why do I have sweaty palms? Lots of things your body does, or your mind will begin to give you indicators that you got to pay attention to this thing called body-mind, because either the grief or the toxic stress is really spilling on top of you. What does this have to do with your kids now? Those kids that have higher level of resilience because they've learned how to navigate their stress, they do better in these difficult situations. For kids that are more vulnerable, more sensitive, more anxious, more worried, when events like this happen, it just overwhelms and implodes the system. So you can see, maybe in you, other people in the family, and certainly in your children, that how you live and the greater your well-being, the easier it is for you to navigate. That's grief, right? It's a human response. There's other research out there about the grieving elephants and the grieving whales. I'm not so sure about them. I just know about the grieving human beings. That's this response. That is about what we do with it. You get the call. Your first response usually is, what? That can't be. I don't believe you. We get into denial quickly. I like it. That's a good thing, because denial is a protector. It's a shield that you put up, because now you got to try to make sense of what you just heard. We talked with the kids today, and they all acknowledged it, almost to a kid. Yep, when I first heard the news, I thought it was a joke. I didn't believe it. I had to go and check it out. This is, what are you going to do about it? As a family therapist, frequently, I will get a phone call at the office from a mom or a dad who said, listen, yesterday in the family, so-and-so died. I would like to schedule my kids for grief therapy. And I understand that, because it scares us, right? We look at them and we think, oh my God, how's this going to affect them long term? I usually say, why don't you wait for a week or two? Because what happens during this stage here is, you then get engaged in family cultural rituals around loss that help you to process the loss. People gather, they cry, they hug, then they begin to laugh. They even do it around food or music or religious practices. They are all terrific, because for most of us, if we plug into the family rituals around loss, when we get to the other side, we're still sad, but it's not disrupting our lives. If 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I've even said as much, you'll see this in a little bit, 2 months out, if somebody is still stuck in that, then they need a different way to take a look at it, or we need a different kind of plan to help them heal their way out of it. But rituals are terrific. I would imagine, nobody has said this to me, but I would imagine that folks came here this evening because they're worried. Maybe it was the blurb that was sent out. Maybe it's because of conversation that you've been hearing in the community. Maybe it's because somewhere inside of your family, somebody has a personal relationship with a family or with the students who died. Whatever your circumstances might be, your concern and your worry is paramount, and it gets you out. And that, what do I do with this, George? How do I take care of me? Because first I got to take care of me before I can take care of my kids. Let's take a look at this. When do you seek help? These are the kinds of things you look at behavior as an indicator of whether or not you're doing okay, your partner, or husband, wife is doing okay, your kids are doing okay. These are the behaviors we look at. The number one, time after time after time in the research, the number one, so check yourself out on this. The number one thing that the human being needs to have is sleep. uninterrupted, 7 to 9 hours, regular, predictable basis. Now, coming out of COVID, forget sleep routines, forget sleep schedules. They all got blown up because everything was just a mess. And it took some families a while to get those routines back, a regular time to go to bed, a regular time that you get up, a regular time that we have meals. Routines are critically important, and sleep is the number one. Now, I'm going to give you, some of you may know this because you're always out there looking for answers. Having a device in your room is a terrible idea. It's terrible for you, and it's super terrible for your kids. Don't turn it into a battle, not suggesting that, but what I'm suggesting to you is here's what the science is saying. The science is saying that the blue light from the screens suppresses the ability to create serotonin so you don't get drowsy and you don't fall asleep. And it takes about an hour away from the blue light in order that your body gets back in sync and you can develop a regular sleep pattern. So, logically, I would recommend to my clients or folks that I would see in the school, establish that sleep time, at least the in-bed time, and back it up an hour and say all devices have to be off by that time. Let the body sync itself up again so that it operates at optimum, and then the serotonin will, in fact, be helpful. Sleep is number one. Sometimes in situations like this, sleep is disrupted because there's a fear. I'll give you a couple examples of that. Even for kids in high school, there's a real possibility and a real likelihood that the death of a classmate or somebody in their school may be the first personal death that they've had to deal with. That grandma and grandpa are alive, mom and dad are doing well, aunts and uncles are doing well. The pet dog has never died, so therefore this is the first up close and personal. That can be really disruptive, and it'll be disruptive to sleep because it creates a fear. Usually kids don't read their bodies well. They don't read the nausea in the gut, the belly aches, the fact that the constipation and diarrhea. Their body on that toxic stressor is really saying to them, you got to pay attention here. Now, I'm going to give you a solution to that. We talked about it today. You know, when we did our groups, the district provided all these bottles of water. And what we said to the kids was, it's really nice. Probably not every meeting of kids has bottles of water. Why would we do that today? Because hydration is a great way to help you re-regulate the cortisol in your body. That's stress hormone. So, hydration. If you're a sports person or your kid is, you know that's what the coaches say. Get some water. Hydrate. Get some water. Because when we use it up, we need to replenish it. And when you're on high stress for grief and loss, we want to pee out the excess cortisol. It'll help your body get regulated. Fear of falling asleep. Sometimes kids' minds, the fear is related to the fact that I'm afraid I won't wake up. They may get really close to you because they're afraid that something will happen to you. So the death of somebody close, especially a first experience, really kind of stretches their ability to stay grounded. And because they're uncomfortable with it, they probably don't talk to you about what it is. So this idea of fear, it's a really good indicator of where their stressors are. And that's tied to that number, that fourth one down there, the constant worry about danger. You know, when we're highly stressed, something happens in us because we're wired to survive, right? That comes from millennial ago. We're hardwired to survive, and therefore we do have a hypersensitivity to danger, even if it's perceived danger. So when you get upset by big events like you guys are experiencing here in the district, it'll take a while for your kids to re-regulate on that, but they will have an exaggerated response. Knowing your kid, you'll know that either when they are really upset, they want to be closer to you, or when they're upset, they want to be further away. Either behavior is okay as long as it's not exaggerated for a long period of time. Isolation, this withdrawing from friends and activities or withdrawing from family, you can tolerate it for a bit. And when I say a bit, a day, two. But when it goes longer than that, you want to pull them back in. You want to make a connection. Here's why. Human beings are wired to be attached to each other, particularly the primary caregivers. That's where we get our strength. That's where we get our safety and our security. So if a kid begins to pull away, that's an indicator that things are not going well, at least for that child. There's just another thought that I wanted to share, and for now it's gone. It'll be back. I'm sure that's the way it works. Remember those the stress characteristics? Concentrating is one of them. Or they get into a loop of wanting to talk about what happened, or they want to talk about a related story. Be patient. If you've got hot buttons, watch your irritability. Watch your own level of angst. Because what our kids need is, they need for us to be the constant. They need for us to be grounded. There's the 2 to 3 months. If it goes with no change, if they're crying every day or every other day, if they're not eating, then that certainly is a significant red flag worry. And worrying about you, worrying about your loved ones. So these are some of the things you can do. I wouldn't wait till something bad happens to try to nurture relationship, conversation. I know our high school kids and sometimes our middle school kids don't want to talk, like, how was school? Fine. Did you do anything special? No. Right? I mean, you know that. However, it's not on this slide. Yes, it is. Check your own family situation out with regard to this. One of the things that, because of the busyness of our lives, that has gone away is family dinner time at the same place at the same time. Here's what the research says. If you can bring family together around the dining table for food, for conversation, the risk factors that we worry most about begin to go away. Being connected to the family is really important. Now, let me play out this hypothetical that's running through my mind right now. Hey, listen, we're going to start having dinner every Wednesday night together. Yeah, well, I'll eat in my room. I'll eat in front of the computer. I'll eat in front of the TV. No, really. We're going to, just plan for it. Mom and I decided, Dad and I decided, every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, we're going to have dinner. And listen, what we're going to do is we just want you to be there. And we want you to stay, because that's really important. Oh, and you can't have your phone at the table. Now you're off and running with an argument. But that is a really important, critical attribute for a healthy family. I'm going to tell you that my goal for you is that everybody shares a bit about their day. They're not sharing. But what I'm saying to you is, you've got this parental power. You share. You tell a story about your day. Rather than a grievance, tell something that went well. Tell something that you were surprised that happened. When you begin to do that and you use Wednesday nights or Tuesday, Thursday, or every night, whatever your family can orchestrate, you will find them beginning to slow down their eating, pay attention, and beginning to share. That is one of the best ways, according to the science and the research, to insulate your kids from bad experiences that they might have out there. When you're concerned, share it. I'm really worried. The guy the other night said, blah, blah, blah. I'm seeing blah, blah, blah. It makes me worried. Let them know that. It doesn't have to be a secret. You won't scare them. You won't overwhelm them. It just opens up this channel of having these conversations. If it doesn't happen automatically, perhaps because of your own vulnerabilities, your own wounds, perhaps because you are a harried schedule, really hectic, that last point there, remind your kids that they are important and they matter. This applies to you guys too, not just your kids. We're trying to prevent some stuff with your children. One of the most common reasons why people seek out a therapist is because they are very successful, but they never feel good enough. They just can't seem to feel satisfied or proud in themselves. I believe it's part of this connection with our kids. Now, I don't believe in gushing like, oh my God, it was great. I watched the way you opened the door coming home and you didn't slam it. It's probably not something that I would highlight. But I might say, you know what I've been noticing? Every morning that it just seems to be more pleasant. Like I really like this new mood, this real new attitude. I noticed the other day you brought the recycling cans in. Oh my God, thanks. I really appreciate that. You notice the things because some kids do feel invisible, but you begin to nurture that, and that goes to you're important. The family works better when everybody chimes in, does their part, and you matter to me. Oh, did I tell you yesterday you matter to me? I'm telling you today, you matter to me. Shift that little bit of a dialogue. I think it'll be really terrific. Your kids are going to be a little cautious when you first do it, if that's not part of your regular stuff. Like, what's wrong with you? What's going on? What's up? The other thing I want to warn you, it's not on the slide, but my mind is now telling me, you know, in the research, there's something called having a yuck face. Yeah, you know what that is. Where you come home from work and your kids say to you, I didn't do it, it's not my fault, what's wrong? Because they can see it here. What I'm suggesting is the facial expressions are a big indicator of what's going on inside, and if you can work on inside, the face is going to be just different. Or to remind yourself that I've had a tough day and I'm probably got one of those yucky faces on that George talked about. I got to say, guys, this face has nothing to do with you. I'll get rid of it, but I just need a few minutes. You tune them into what's going on. Let's talk about hugs, because now we're into the science of relationships. The science says that a hug is most effective when it lasts for 20 seconds. I want you to sit with that for a second. 20 seconds is not a long time. But what we know is there are not a lot of hugs. Certainly in education, we've had to back away from them, right? Because bad things have happened between adults and kids. So even when a kid is like having a really bad day, it's really hard to give them a comforting hug because we have to be cautious. Less so at home. So one night I'm giving a presentation, and in the audience is a colleague of mine, a superintendent from another school district, and I'm talking about the power of this 20-second hug. I saw him a couple weeks later, and he said to me, hey, George, can I talk to you about that 20-second hug? I said, sure. He said, well, when I heard you say that, he said, now I have a 14-year-old daughter, Becky. He said, I went home that night, and I got in, and I said to my wife, where's Becky? And my wife said, she's upstairs doing homework. So, Becky, nothing, no response. Becky, what? Becky, come on down here for a second, would you please? Daddy, I'm doing homework. Look, I understand that. This won't take long. And he's saying to himself, only 20 seconds. So she comes, and she said, what? He walks over to her and puts his arms around her, and she starts squirming. This is creepy. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? I said, well, what did you do? He said, I did this. 17, 18, 19, 20. He said, I stepped away from her, and she went back upstairs storming like, you're a creepy old man. I said, that was it? He said, oh, no, that wasn't the end of the story. He said about 2 days later, he said, when I came home from work, she said, Dad? I said, yeah. He said, can I have another one of those 20-second hugs? That's attachment. It's a human need. It's not meant to shame. It's not meant to embarrass. It's meant to connect. Think about this. Think about times when you have not been at your best for whatever reason. A work thing, a home thing, you're not feeling well, whatever it is. And you have an opportunity to be hugged by somebody who is safe, and they just want to hug you to make you okay. Doesn't that feel great? I mean, it does. Human beings need the attachment. Our babies need the attachment, but you can't dump it on them if you haven't used it much at all. You got to work toward it. The more connected the family is, the more connected you are with your kids, the greater the likelihood that you're going to be able to talk about uncomfortable things and they'll listen, and the more likely they're going to share with you uncomfortable things so that you can listen. When you're worried, say it. Tell your partner, tell your spouse, I'm concerned about George. Why? What are you worried about? And you have that conversation. Haven't you noticed that blah, 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 blah? Don't sit with it because of the worry. If you sit with it, that's going to contribute to your toxic stress. Your body is not going to like that very much. So sharing it is a way of emptying your body to do that. If you don't know what to do, you're seeing a change at home, I'm a big fan of calling the school counselor. Now, let me tell you why that is. I happen to love school counselors, nurses, SACs in the school. I do a lot of work with them because of my work. And what I know is that they want nothing more than to make a contribution somehow to the well-being of your kid. Rather than them calling home for whatever the reason, they would entertain and welcome a call from you that said, hey, you know, on the screen the other night, he said such and such. I think he was talking about my son. Can you help me through this? Reach out and call the school counselor. If it's more than that, more than you've made adjustments, the school and you have figured out that it's bigger than that, then ask for who in the community can I talk to because I'm worried about my kid. Now, you can do some research on this. If you go to Psychology Today website and you click on Therapy Locator, and you put in your zip code, everybody in the geographical area who is licensed as a therapist, they will give you their specialty, what they prefer to do, whether they're virtual or in person, whether they take your insurance or not, because sometimes you have to get outside of the loop of you and the school if, in fact, your kid is really holding on to a whole lot of crap, technically speaking crap, and it's not temporary, that it's becoming part of their style. If you don't want to do that, because that's a big leap for you, call the pediatrician. Here's what I'm seeing. What are you suggesting? You've known my kid for 10 years, 5 years, 12 years. What do I need to do? If the physician says, hey, listen, bring him in, bring her in, then do that. Say, I'm just concerned about you know how you've been having a lot of belly aches? Remember you've been talking, you don't want to go to school because of the diarrhea? That's not healthy. There's something going on. We just need to figure it out. Now, bias. Here's my bias. We live in a country where the solution to most everything is a pill of some kind. It's not what I'm favored of. If, in fact, organically something is going wrong and your child's body is reflecting that, then if we figure out what's going on and we change that, the body will adapt. I'd much rather do it with better sleep. I'd much rather do it with the second one, nutrition. I'd much rather do it with the third one, exercise. Those top three will help to re-regulate you and your kids. Let's talk about the gut in a positive way, not gut problems. We now know that there is a thing called a gut feeling about something. We now know that there's a bundle of nerves that come out of the brain near the heart area, and they wind up down here in the gut, and it's a sense of danger. Things aren't well, things aren't good, I'm missing something. What I say to you is if you're worried about your kid and you can't put your finger on it, then you go and you meet with your physician, your school counselor, or you go with a therapist, and I say, no, things are fine. If that gut feeling can't be resolved, stay with it. Particularly moms. Because I believe that's the in utero connection, the heartbeat connection between you and those babies. So gut feeling, stay with it. It could keep your kids safe. More support team. I don't know how connected you are or you are not with the school. These folks, in any combination, can be a powerful ally for you to sort through and try to make sense out of. what's going on. I know that because on Monday when I was in this school and I had the opportunity to stay in that office and just do this round table conversation about what's going on, I was incredibly impressed. The sensitivity, the insight, the knowledge of the kids, being able to connect the dots. You've got a powerful team here. I don't know about the middle school. I have not been over there. But build that relationship. In order for you to deliver this, you have to be well. And because I don't know any of you, then please understand that my next comment is not meant to offend. Simply because of the number of people in the room, some of you suffer personally yourself. Variety of reasons, variety of symptoms. I think it's kind of the sign, the symptom of the culture in which we're currently living. I say that to you because your well-being has a direct effect on the well-being of your children. And if you're in your family, there are two adults, as opposed to being a single mom or a single dad, then it's really much better for the kids if both are well. This list are things that you can do on the sleep, nutrition, exercise, the meditation, the healthy relationships. These things are really critical for you to be able to get up and do tomorrow and feel good physically and feel good emotionally. So the first one, sleep. We talked about it, 7 to 9, regular routine. Diet and nutrition, sleep, nutrition, good food. Another thing that got blown up during COVID, grab food wherever you get it. There was not a regular balance of the nutrition. The water can help to lower that cortisol level, hydration. Exercise doesn't have to be the gym. It can be a walk. It can be a bike. But when you move your body, you burn up your excess stressors. Because remember, the stress hormones are meant for fight, flight. Well, if you got excess and there's no threat, then you got to get rid of it somehow, so move your body to do that. Those of you that do a yoga or a Tai Chi, good for you. Powerful way for you to re-regulate a body that gets dysregulated. Spiritual practices can be secular. Some people talk about a yoga or a meditation as almost spiritual, or connected to a predominant religion. Either one of those, both of those, has a real powerful regulating component. Healthy relationships. I'll tell you what I tell teachers when I'm doing this, having this conversation with them. It's kind of like everybody's got a friends group, but if you really want to be well because you want your kids to be well, then you're going to have to call some of your friends and tell them you can't be friends with them for a while because they're not healthy. Say, listen, I love you. We've been friends for a long time, but I got to take a hiatus from you. Here's the reason why. I got to get my act together for my kid, and then when we're healthier, we can invite you back in. Said with tongue in cheek, healthy relationships. Let's check that out. How many of you worry about your kid when you see them hanging around with other kids that you're not so crazy that they're hanging around with? That's a hard problem to solve. But it's the same thing with you. If you hang out with, here's the bad news. The bad news is some of those unhealthy people, they're family members. So it's kind of tough, like getting rid of sisters and brothers and sister-in-laws. However, that's a real true thing. How do you create wellness inside of your home enough that your kids begin to benefit? Alcohol, caffeine, and other substances. You can do that if you want. This is not me saying, oh, don't do that. What I'm saying to you, use that as an indicator of your stress level. One of the things that went up during COVID, purchase of alcohol, use of marijuana. Why? Isolation, dysregulation, really tough managing the mood. Not supposed to go out and do the walking thing. But what I'm saying to you is, the more of that, I said this to the kids today, the more of that you use, it's an indicator that says you're unable to regulate yourself. So there again, it's a balance. Community resources. You don't have to be in this all by yourself. Because of where we live in the country, and because there's lots of resources that's accessible, either a 988, which is the new and reliable crisis line, we gave that number to kids today. They can call and they can just talk to somebody and kind of get past the bad moment. Or the other one I like is Second Floor, the 888-222-2228. In my practice, I tell my kids to put it in their phone because they can text and call that anytime, even when everybody else seems to have abandoned them, but they know they're not in a good spot. We need to help kids be aware of themselves to take care of themselves. Some folks have said to me, where were you 15 years ago when my kid was 5? And I say it's never too late. Ever. Ever. Doesn't matter what the behavior is, doesn't matter what the health and well-being is, to begin to make slow changes that all emanate from you. I don't want to apologize for that statement, but they really all emanate from you. It's really the responsibility that we have, because when we get it right, our kids benefit from that, and then they get it right. There's always, always, always somebody to help. I don't believe in coddling. I don't think that's healthy. I don't believe in giving kids everything that they say they need and you think they need because that'll make things better. I don't believe in that either. I believe it does have to be on balance. And you know what they really want? I'm going to show you a book that I'm going to recommend if you're a reader that you get. They really want you to show up. They just want you to show up in spite of the tough time that they take. Say, with your help, the kids can do really well. Here are the resources. That's The Power of Showing Up. That's Dan Siegel's book. It's written for parents. It's real simple on what our kids' neurobiology looks like and how we can help them regulate it. They are not old enough to regulate on their own. They're learning how to do that, and we need to give them support, both the school folks and the parent folks. This was one of the first books that I read. Talks about how your biology, how your biography, your life story, your lived experiences become your biology. Why the gut problems? Why the migraine problems? And how you can heal. It's an easy read. Pediatrician Nadine Burke-Harris talks about how she had to think differently from medical school to what she was seeing with her kids, meaning the kids of the families and the families that she was serving, healing the long-term effects when bad stuff has happened along the way. The same authors for the first book, which was Power of Showing Up, that's Dan Siegel's work as well, is no drama discipline. Discipline not intended to be punitive. Discipline intended to be teaching, giving kids opportunities to learn to do it differently than before when they screwed up. We could spend a whole night on the thing I'm going to say next. It's so common, and it really is not very effective mostly. Something goes wrong, and the parent's first response usually is, give me your phone. It's usually not effective. Part of it, we want them to have a phone for a lot of good reasons. And part of it is we're not quite sure how to shape and reshape their behavior. No Drama Discipline is a good book for that. So, when we work together, like evenings like tonight, like you working with the staff at school, or you working with the pediatrician, or you working with your own family therapist, all of us are stronger than some of us. And I think being here just shows that you care. So I'm going to end with that and willing to entertain comments or questions.